So, Darren, what made you decide to become a police officer? Where did that whole story start for you?
I started when I was a kid. I wanted to be a farmer or a police officer, so I did both.
Okay. What what was the guiding principle that made you really want to become a police officer? Was it, seeing it on TV? Was it, wanting to help people? What really kind of caused that?
My uncle was a DNR agent. I actually wanted to do the DNR, so I went into school for criminal justice to go into that field. But at that time, being a DNR officer was about impossible because there was only one per county, and they weren't going anywhere. Wasn't much movement to move up, so that's why I looked at just doing local law enforcement.
So, were you always like a city police officer? How did you get that start? Was it in city police or was it like a sheriff's department or?
Through criminal justice in Indian Hills, you did an internship. I did my internship in Bloomfield because I figured if I was going to be a police officer, I always loved dogs, always had dogs. I wanted to be a canine handler, and the Bloomfield Police Department had the only canine in the area at the time. So I chose to intern down there with them, and action in Bloomfield was pretty slow. So I did half my internship with the sheriff's department in Davis County, and they ended up having an opening while I was interning. So I applied and tested and got the job there.
Okay. So what was the environment for police officers like when you first started?
They were well looked upon when I started. We didn't have the negativity that we've had in the past. Basically, a law officer's word was golden. When you went to court, you testified. The judge always believed you, which they should, because you're supposed to tell the truth. Whereas today, if you don't have a recording or something to go with it, they don't believe anything.
Gotcha. Now, you watch the news and, you've seen that change over time, and a lot of what you see on the news really kind of seems to be wrapped around what happens in bigger cities. And obviously, I'm assuming policing in major metro areas is probably just a little bit different in the micro markets like what you're talking about. Is that accurate, or is it just the same problems on a smaller scale?
I've actually went road with other departments in larger cities, Terre Haute, Indiana, and they deal with the exact same issues we're dealing with, just on a broader scale. Whereas we would know the whole town and all the components in the town, they know a section of the town and the components in that section. So,
Gotcha. So when you went and did those ride-alongs, what was it, just like seeing what it was like, or were you doing training for something specific?
I was actually doing my own for canine. I was riding with canine officers in different cities because I was in the process of trying to get the canines here.
Okay. And what was obviously, I'm assuming canine training for an officer is just a little bit different than regular police work. You have an extra buddy with you that you have to take care of all the time. Was there any special training that you had to do for that?
The police officer training is exactly the same whether you got the dog or not. Just the dog is a tool, basically a weapon that's always loaded, and you have to treat it as a loaded weapon.
Okay. How long did you work with canines?
Well, unfortunately, could never get one here for me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And my first opportunity to have one was we just got two on the PD, and I was offered one of them, but I was on my way out the door already. So
Gotcha. Well, let's take a step back here just a second. When was it that you actually became a police officer?
I started in 98, in
Okay.
October of 98.
And obviously, society's changed a lot since 1998.
Yes.
Even looking back at myself, I have seen a shift in what society has become over the last 20 some years. What were the prevailing issues during your initial time as a police officer?
Like the criminal acts and stuff we start.
Yeah.
Well, it was basically pre-meth, so meth hadn't taken hold yet. So marijuana was a big issue. Drinking, driving, your typical thefts, but not like we have today where they steal your bike out of your yard for the metal. They would actually be breaking into stores or some of that aspect. But
Okay. And when did you really start to see that shift happen? From the marijuana and things like that to the more serious stuff, the meth and the harder drugs that have come onto the scene.
yeah, I basically started in the rollover time as it was starting to kick in. That was back when anhydrous, red phosphorus. You don't ever hear of a red phosphorus lab anymore because they blew up and killed a lot of people that did them. So, but they used to steal anhydrous from the plants out of the tanks. So, the first couple of years, I can remember sitting on night shifts out with the tanks, sitting there guarding anhydrous tanks, so people wouldn't come along with hoses and steal anhydrous, which was also self-curing because it would burn them.
I was just getting ready to say that seems like it would be a fairly dangerous thing for people to do. I mean, set aside that there's a police officer sitting there, it just seems like you're dealing with a very volatile chemical that is potentially deadly if they do it wrong.
Correct. And they get freeze burn, which we had one guy was stealing some, ran from us. He had it in a 5-gallon bucket between his legs, splishing and splashing, and he froze himself in an area he didn't want to freeze himself.
Oh, man. He learned his lesson, I'm guessing.
I don't think he did, no, because he got caught again
Oh, okay.
after that. So,
some people, they learn the hard way.
and that is one thing that's really changed in the last 25, 30 years is the repeat offenders. People used to actually go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
If it was your third offense, stealing a candy bar, you went to jail for a year. Now, nobody goes to jail. And so we just constantly have repeat offenders. They're waiting for a trial for the first offense. In the meantime, they commit 6, 7 more offenses while they're waiting for trial for the first one because they're not in jail.
Do you think that has been one of the challenges that police officers have faced more recently?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face. There's nothing more disheartening than working hours, days solving a crime. To arrest the suspect, put him in jail, go back, start typing your arrest report, and watch them walk by the window as they're released before you even complete the paperwork.
And what's changed? I mean, from a police officer's perspective, what has changed that has caused that to happen?
I couldn't pinpoint one thing, but I know there's just more crime, and we don't have the space. We don't have enough prisons. We don't have enough cells to hold them. The Wapello County Jail, when it was built in 2000, is 100 beds plus, and it was originally supposed to make money for the county, housing inmates for other counties. It actually loses us money because we have to house our prisoners in other counties because we're full. Which that's why they get released a lot, because it's cheaper to release them than it is to spend the money per day to send them somewhere else.
Sure. Now that's an interesting topic, because looking back at the last 20 years, the crime seems to have increased a little bit. If you have more people that are eligible to go to jail, but the population, we haven't seen that increase in the particular area that you're talking about. So is it drugs that have caused that increase in crime predominantly, or is it something else?
Drugs are predominantly involved, and poverty is involved. So there's no avenue for people to get higher paying jobs or make more income. So, and we run into a lot of people that do drugs. They would rather go out and get metal, spend all week salvaging metal and sell it one day a week for a couple $100 instead of going out and get a job where they could make that much money in a day. But they don't have the freedom to do the drugs, so they can't go get the job.
Gotcha.
And drugs take over a person completely.
What have been some of the things that you have seen over your career that have been a little more shocking to you as you've seen the evolution of drugs and the repercussions that drugs have had on, be it the community, be it the familial unit, whatever that looks like? What are some of the, as a police officer, repercussions that you have personally seen?
So you typically wouldn't see people on the street digging through rocks, collecting rocks, swinging around the poles, taking their clothes off in winter, being naked, which is typical of the meth and heroin. They just lose their mind, and their body gets hot, and they're always trying to cool off, and they think rocks are collectibles, and the junk they will have in their backpacks. We all see them walk around town with the backpacks, but what they have in them usually isn't anything of value.
Has that caused drugs? Obviously, you hear about it in the news all the time. Has that caused a breakdown of the family unit to some certain degree, you think?
Exactly does, because kids see their parents. Usually not a two-parent household. You'd be amazed how many grandparents are raising kids. And so they're never seeing their parents, or when they do see them, they're strung out. They steal from family. They steal from anybody to go get money to buy drugs. It's just a cycle over and over. And then when nothing happens to them, kids learn, why not?
Gotcha.
Because I had a guy steal a car and caught him with the car. He says, yeah, I stole it. No big deal. I'll be out of jail in the morning. It's a nonviolent crime. I'll just steal another one tomorrow.
So they've definitely gotten a lot more brave over time.
Yeah.
That's fair to say.
And we used to have a lot more resistance to being arrested. Now when they resist, it's extremely violent, where we just used to have a lot of passive resistance because they didn't want to go to jail, but now it's no big deal to go to jail because I'm not going to be there very long. Where before they were going to be there for days, weeks, months. And I don't know what the solution is to keep them there longer, but there's got to be something we can. If there's no consequence, what do you have to deter them?
Right. From a violence towards officers standpoint, have you seen that get worse, or has that improved over time?
I think the type of violence shown towards officers is worse. It's more violent when they get into it with a police officer. We used to have a lot more passive resistance. They might resist going into cuffs, wrestle and stuff, but they weren't trying to hurt you. They were trying to get away. Where now they'll try to hurt you, and there's several officers that have been hurt because they want to hurt you because they're not of the right mind.
Gotcha. One of the things over the last few years that has been a movement, and from a national perspective, it's really been the mantra has been, we want to protect the citizens, so we want body cameras on officers so we can record those interactions. And it's been interesting where you've seen a couple of occasions where it has done that. But there's also been a couple of occasions where it's vindicated officers for people coming back and saying that the officers did things that, in fact, it was proven out that they didn't do. And I say all that to say, have you noticed in your career from the point of people knowing that officers don't have body cameras on them to knowing that they do have body cameras, have you seen a shift in the way that they act towards officers when there's that that arrest?
Not really. I mean, I was on the department when we started using VHS tapes. When the cars first got them, we could actually turn them off manually if we didn't want them on. We had no body mics. No, even though they were cameras, they were just picture only, no sound. And so you see that transference, and people resented them at first, didn't want them. But as it goes, if you're not doing anything wrong, the camera will do nothing but vindicate you, which thankfully I had the camera rolling on a stop years ago because I had a false allegation. And when they watched the video, I was vindicated, and they didn't believe my word till they watched the video, which is disheartening.
Right.
But that's the way things are rolling, and we just got the body mics or body cameras as I was leaving, so I never had one. But we always had microphones on our belts or our pockets. Somewhere on our person we had a body mic, which would sometimes work and sometimes wouldn't work. Nothing worked inside of the hospital, or if you went inside the schools, if you had a lot of metal. So we didn't have a ton of capabilities of videoing everywhere. But as long as they're doing the right thing and doing their job, the cameras will not harm them. And cell phone, of course, everybody in public always standing there with the cell phone
Sure.
videotaping. I'm videotaping this. Go ahead. I'm videotaping it too.
It's interesting when that is brought up that maybe I might be videotaping as well. It kind of smashes down the aspect that I'm going to get you on something.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there's still in incidents where they'll have a video on a cell phone, but they don't have the beginning, or they don't play the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then to try to twist it around, where it's great to have the whole thing. Like I had one where they played a 6-minute part. Yeah, that 6-minute part I didn't look very good, but when you play the whole 28 minutes, that makes a whole world of difference.
Yeah. Did you see a lot of that where people tried to twist a story and then, you had to quote unquote go review the tapes just to find out, the officer was right? Were there a lot of occasions that happened?
There's been several of those, and to the supervisor's benefits, most of the time they take the complaints hand in hand. They know most complaints are false, but if there's any merit to them, that's the value of the cameras and the recordings. They will go back through and read through them, or pull the reports and read the reports and look.
Have you seen, because of that, there's been a little bit of a shift, especially on the national news with, the advent of the body cameras. There's a lot more skepticism towards the law enforcement career. I don't think that's a shock to anybody. But have you seen, at least on the local front, more difficulty in getting new recruits as officers?
It's extremely hard to get new officers. To give you an example, when I applied, you had to have a degree to get on, at least an associate's degree. And then it went to you had to have so many college credit hours. And then it went to where you just had to have a high school diploma. And then it went to GED. And the same thing on the drug side. You couldn't have any arrests. Then it was minor arrests. Then if you haven't had an OWI or a drug conviction in the last 5 years. So the standards keep going because you can't get anybody to apply. Where I can remember testing, we had one position, we tested 70 people for one position.
Wow.
Then I can remember we had 4 positions and we tested 3 people. So yeah, that is greatly shifted.
Now, is it because of the accountability, you think, or the stress that comes with the position, or is it just because people don't want to become police officers?
I think it's the negativity that has been put on public media, TV, social media and stuff, that people don't want to get rolled up into that and are worried about basically, their future if they get into law enforcement, how that's going to pertain.
Sure. So let's talk about that for just a second, because people hear on the news all the time about the bad officers. That's just, you get inundated with that on the news. They're obviously so far more good cops than bad cops, but you never really hear from the good cops, because they're out doing their jobs, right? It's a stressful job. That's a fair statement, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's stressful, and a lot of guys that quit early can't leave it at work.
Well, that's what I was wondering is, what is some of the stress that police officers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? Because I think that's the story that, a lot of people don't get to hear, because they don't talk to police officers on a regular basis, because a lot of people have been taught that the police are bad and you don't trust a police officer. So they don't hear what it is that a police officer actually goes through, what they have to deal with for stress, what they have to deal with in their personal life.
There's tons of different stressors, and everybody handles them differently. Dealing with kids, abused kids, dead, kids getting run over, adults, elderly abuse, dementia is a horrible one, where you see a dementia patient beat the tar out of his spouse. You can't arrest him. There's nowhere for him to go. They have to live there together. They're wearing a diaper, and there's just nothing. There is nothing for them. And so then you have the stress of, how do you keep her safe when legally there's nothing I can do with the dementia patient, who on his side has nothing, can't control what's going on anyway. So, and then we've had kids. I've dealt with kids that their parents have basically abandoned them, where they're digging through trash for food, through the neighbor's house. I actually had a kid filling milk jugs with water at the neighbor's house because they had no water. You see kids out riding bicycles or a four-wheeler, little big wheels in the snow, wearing diapers because nobody's watching them. So there are tons of stressors. And the fact that everything they do is scrutinized. If you get complained on, they're guilty. Regardless of how it goes, until you play the video, everybody perceives them as guilty.
So how do you, as an officer, especially a young officer that doesn't, they haven't really gotten through, they haven't dealt with it for years and kind of developed their own way of handling that sort of situation. How do they deal with that? Because that's got to really negatively affect their mental health.
A lot of the new officers that we hire now, including jail staff, are young. They have no life experience. And just imagine yourself as a 19-year-old. You illegally can be hired, but you're not old enough to buy a gun. You're not old enough to buy bullets, but we can hire you as a police officer. That alone is stressful. And then being put into a situation where criminals want to try to intimidate you, and to tell them to be scared but don't be intimidated is something that has to be learned. You can be scared in a situation and nervous, but you cannot show it, because if you show it, they'll eat you alive.
how do you teach somebody something like that?
I don't know that you can, other than being in those situations and getting through them and learning life experience. Because we've all been there where we're getting chewed out for something and we're just shaking and nervous. And then here's well, no big deal.
Yeah.
But you just have to get through that. And everybody wants to try to intimidate you. You just have to hold up and not be intimidated. And how we handle people is so different. Now, when we arrest people, they want us to control them, but not hurt them. And to give you an example, we had a naked lady one morning, high on meth and heroin, just fanatical, screaming, hollering. And how do you arrest a naked lady that's trying to hurt you, kicking and clawing and trying to bite you, and not get a hold of her in an offensive way with the entire public watching you? I don't know if you went through the Citizens Academy or not.
Mm-hmm.
You probably watched that video.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about. But to take her and what she's trying to wipe body fluids on the female officer, and you have to take her to the ground and not hurt her, and then she poops on you. So you still can't hurt her, but trying to get a hold of somebody that's all sweaty, and it's hard. In the same situation where somebody's bloody, that's like trying to hold grease. You can't. People think it's really easy to control somebody, but it's not physically until.
Yeah. How do you walk away from work at some point, right? You clock out at the end of the day after you've, dealt with something like that, or something even worse. You mentioned, children, seeing abandoned children or abused children, or even a death of somebody. How do you reconcile that with yourself when you leave work?
That's something they have to learn too. That's where they can't handle it a lot of times. You have to learn to just leave it at work. It's just teach it as a job. You just got to leave it at work. There's lots of things you can't. I still sit with my back to the wall when I go into a restaurant and I'm scanning everybody. Because everybody's a liar and everybody's a criminal until you prove otherwise. But and a lot of times you're completely out of patience because there's a philosophy in law enforcement: we ask, we tell, we make. That's how I was trained. We ask you to turn around and get in the car. You're going to jail. We tell you, and then we'll make you. Now it's ask, beg, 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 before we make. Because
so a clear change in philosophy.
Yes, because everybody's, the police are so abusive. But we're not. We take steps to ensure them to cooperate, and most of the time they will cooperate if you present it to them in the correct way. But now they're under the understanding that they can cuss us out, they can spit on us, they can do anything they want, but we can't do anything back that's offensive to them.
Where does that start from? I mean, criminals, they're usually not in the right headspace. I think, that's fairly common knowledge. Whether it's a mental health episode, whether it's drugs, some of it is clearly just disrespect, obviously. But where do you think that that's coming from? Because it does, at least the perception that I've seen is that seems to have gotten worse over the last 5-10 years. Is that an accurate statement, number one? And number two, have you, as a police officer, kind of gauged where that might be coming from, or how we've come to this place?
It's the lack of respect is something that's very important both ways. Even though they might be doing something wrong, illegal, there might be a different reason why they're doing it than just to be a criminal. And you have to show them respect. In return, you'll get respect. That's the way I was always taught and brought up, to respect everybody, and especially your elders. And I've taken people to jail. Back in the day, we took them in the front seat. We didn't have cages. We didn't have, they just rode in the front seat with you. No handcuffs. Didn't have any issues because you respect them, they respect you. They weren't going to try to hurt you. You couldn't do that with somebody that's high because they are going to try to hurt you. So they have to be in cuffs. And then we get in trouble for not having having the cuffs too tight. Might make a mark on their wrist. So then they slip the cuffs. Now they have a weapon on their wrist that they're swinging at you. So it seems like everything we come up with is handicaps the police officer another step that makes it more and more unsafe. And we're already carrying gear and safety equipment on us that puts us in a handicap.
So going back to the beginning, when we talk about recruiting new officers, these are all the things as they're trying to decide whether they want to explore that career path that they're hearing and having to say, is this really the road that I want to take and become a police officer?
Yeah. When you're training new officers and you walk into a house, you need to tell them the rules when we go into a house. Don't stand in the doorway. Don't stand under the door jamb. Don't sit on the furniture. Don't lean against the wall. And of course, they're going to ask you, why? Because you're going to sit in something sticky. Something's going to be crawling on you. So that's why you stay out of that, because the houses we get called to a lot, the smells you'll never forget. And there's been many times you have to throw away uniform from feces on the floor, stepping in them because the smells getting into your boots. Fleas. I've seen fleas so bad on your black shoes you can see brown fleas growing all over because they're just so heavy. So, and to tell somebody this is the environment you're working in most of the time. And
wow.
Like I say, you're doing everything in this area from a parking ticket to a murder on a weekly basis. I know one of the things people complain about a lot is traffic. People speed all over, blow stop signs. Nobody ever does anything about it. Yep, you're 100% right. Because we have so many calls for service, and we've all had it. Somebody's going to go speeding by you, blows a stop sign, whatever, right in front of you, and you just have to keep going because you're going to a call. And then people see you not paying any attention to it, and they'll call and complain on you.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to deal with that you're getting complained on for doing your job. Because your priority is getting to that call, but they don't know you're going to a call.
Right. That's only what's in their world that they're
seeing. It's the perception.
Yeah. Which is, again, another topic for discussion. We have seen over the last 20 years a severe transition of funding away from police departments, where there used to be a lot of funding going towards police departments, not just in rural communities, but across the nation, to the point where there's been a defund the police movement across many metro areas. And now we're starting to see, because the elected officials in those communities really took that message and ran with it and did start to scale back on the budgets for police officers, and now they're starting to reverse course on that because they've seen that less funding to police departments isn't maybe the best idea in the world. But regardless, I think it's fair to say that across the nation we have seen a lot of communities scale back on the amount of police officers that are available, which is kind of weird because we've also seen at the same time an uptick in crime. And I don't necessarily think that the uptick in crime is related to the decline in the number of officers. So how do police departments manage the fact that they're trying to do probably more work with less people than what they had before?
Well, the legislature, unfortunately, you skirted around it, but it's the legislature that's doing this. Seattle defund the police, and then less than a year later, they're offering $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 signing bonus to get officers to come back. Because lack of police, crime increased. They're going to go together, and then in those certain areas, if you don't have enough law enforcement and they know you're not there, the crime will increase because just the uniform alone deters crime. Just the presence, because there's different levels. You know, you got your presence, your verbal, your physical, different levels of force. Just, you'd be amazed. Just, you've been there. Cop gets behind you. You're slowing down. Make sure your seatbelt's on.
There are plenty of videos and memes about that very topic.
You know, and in essence, you know, there probably isn't anybody out there that doesn't speed, but you don't speed when they're behind you.
Right. Right.
So their presence does make a difference. So if the legislature didn't make it hard, and if the legislature would back the police departments instead of picking on them, you know, I'm going to use Minnesota for, I think it was Minnesota, where the 2 rookie officers got fired and sent to prison. And on the first day of the job, they have no idea what they're doing. They're taking the lead of their training officer to punish somebody because you don't argue with your training officer. When he tells you to do this, you do it because it's usually a safety issue. And then to punish them for that just blew my mind. And that, to me, was a big deterrent for any newcomer. Well, God, on my first day on the job, I could go to prison. I don't even know what I'm doing yet.
Right. Do you see that as something that has been, at least in your personal experience, having the police department having your back when situations like that arise where you're getting the blame for something that you didn't do anything wrong? Has that been something that has that you've had the pleasure of having, or have you been scrutinized through that?
I've seen it both ways. There is always those supervisors that will have your back, and not if you did anything wrong.
Sure.
You know,
Accountability is
accountability, but if you're trying to do the right thing, they'll go to bat for you all the way. And then there's others that will throw you under the bus in a heartbeat to keep their position. So,
Gotcha.
and you just have to learn who you can trust and not trust. And I always use our SWAT team as an example. The 10 guys on that team, you trust your life with, because when you're going into, it's hard enough to be a police officer, but when they train you, you look this direction. No matter what happens there, you never turn your eyes away from your direction. So you have to have complete trust in the people that have your 6 o'clock behind you. And it's a hard thing to teach. And once you've learned it, it's hard, you can't let go of it.
Gotcha. What's kind of do some opposites here? What's one of the toughest things that you've had to deal with as a police officer? I mean, like not necessarily most strenuous, but what's one of the things that have really been tough for you to deal with?
Different abuses involving children. You know, like I had a girl that came to me. I'd known her for a year in the school, and for a year never said 2 words to me. But all of a sudden one day just came up and latched onto me bawling, telling me that she's been raped by her brother since she was 5 years old.
Oh, man.
You know, and it turned out to be all 100% true.
That would be tough. Mm-hmm. That would be tough.
Yep. And it's even worse when the family allowed it.
Yeah.
So she was never safe at home. She only felt safe at school. It's, you don't realize the environment, even though they might have a shell, everything's perfect. Because kids are very good at putting on a shell.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, when they have the fear that, they've been told if you tell there's going to be a problem, and they have to be in that environment all night long. That's probably a pretty big deterrent for them to speak up.
And it's even harder today because DHS is less, and they only deal with abuse purely now, where they used to be able to deal with drugs and different things. But so now if somebody gets taken from the home, you usually put them right back with a relative that sometimes even lives in the same home.
Yeah.
So we don't accomplish anything.
Gotcha. So to counter that, obviously there's been good things that have happened. What's one of the best things that you've had the fortune of dealing with as a police officer?
I love the fact that police officers are so giving with their funds. Every year we do a Christmas fundraiser for a different kid, and we go out and we find a different kid every year, and every year we do a phenomenal amount of gifts and money that all the police officers willingly throw in cash. And just the look and the thankfulness of the family. It's just a shame we can only help one a year.
Yeah.
But financially, police officers have been extremely underpaid. Finally, that ball is rolling the other direction because people found out, got to have them.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get them if you don't pay them. So
yeah, and there's a certain compensation that probably needs to come with a dangerous job.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. I'm pretty fortunate. I think I probably drew my gun maybe once or twice ever to actually point at somebody, and never got punched. Never had to punch anybody. But I was older. I didn't start till I was 28. So I wasn't easily intimidated. And that, if they can see they don't intimidate you, then they have to think, can they take you? If they have to think they can take you, the battle's already over.
Gotcha. That has to be, especially the first time that you have to point a gun at somebody. That has to be just really hard to deal with. The thought of, am I going to have to point this gun at somebody? And if I do that, am I going to have to consider using that weapon?
Yeah. And that time I did, had it not been for society, I would have shot him in a heartbeat. But instead, I had to think, because he was sitting in a chair just like you are, reached his hand down the side of the chair and pulled up a gun that fast, pointed at me. And of course, I pulled mine, and then he eventually dropped it. He wanted me to shoot him, and I should have shot him because he was pointing a gun at me. But because society said police are always guilty, you had to think before you shoot. So,
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something that, when you hear about police officers using their weapons, you just made a case right there. It was that fast. Because I don't imagine that there's any training that teaches an officer that you have, a quarter of a second to think. And how do you make that decision? So I guess I'll ask the question, because people don't typically ask the question, how do you think that fast, and how do you make that decision that fast as to whether you're going to use that weapon or not?
Is lots of training. We do lots of firearms training. Do night training, do it under the lights and dark, light, room scenarios. If you don't have the training, you're going to be slow. And you have to teach yourself to stay on top of that. Now, as far as the timing, if you have to think about it, it's too late. And that's the bad part. That's where officers are hesitating when they shouldn't be hesitating, because they're scared they're going to go to jail for doing their job.
But to the opposite side, when they hesitate, there's a potential that they could lose their lives, and we've seen that.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, we've seen cases where officers probably fired when they shouldn't have fired as well. So, for both sides of that coin. But we've also seen officers die because they did make that hesitation. So you're talking about a split second decision, and I don't think that that's something that people necessarily appreciate to the fullest extent. Of you do have to make that decision. It's not something you have 10 minutes or even 1 minute to sit down and rationalize. You have to make that decision right now.
No, I think anybody that sits on a jury and has to judge a police officer on a split second decision should have to go through a shoot house of a shoot, don't shoot.
What's a shoot house? Sorry.
So you're going into a house where a target will pop up or flip, and it'll either be a citizen or a bad guy or what. And you can't judge by appearance, because you might have a real pretty lady flip around with a gun in her hand, or you might have a guy in a stocking and hoodie pull around with a cell phone in his hand. Which one are you going to shoot? And when you have a split second to shoot, you'll real quickly learn out how fast they're shooting a person with a cell phone. So a lot of that's where the training comes in. We have to look and identify. We always tell everybody, look at the person, but never make dead eye contact with them. Because even though it appears I'm looking you in your face, I can see your hands, I can see your feet. That's what's going to hurt me.
Gotcha.
So they have to learn, appear to make eye contact, but use your peripheral to see what else is there to hurt. And that's where you've got to identify that cell phone and toy guns that look so real, BB guns. That guy that pulled that gun on me, that was a pellet gun. And it was an exact replica. There was, until you read on it that it was a BB gun, you had no idea it was a BB gun.
And obviously, I know I'm gonna ask the question that's probably just stupid to ask, but there has to be, when an officer does make a mistake, there has to be a lot of remorse in that.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you accidentally shoot somebody you should have shot, there's gonna be a ton of remorse. But that's where the totality of the circumstances. If they're in a stressful environment, you're going to a house where something bad's going on, and you're doing a room search, and somebody jumps out at you. You train not to panic and flinch, but you do.
Yeah,
you're always going a little bit, and to see something from darkness to light and back and forth is hard, especially when most guns are black. Knives.
Yeah. One thing that, and the only reason that I'm asking this is because it was literally on the news today in New York City. I have heard police officers in the past say, I'm actually more scared of a knife than a gun, because a knife hurts worse. And the reason that I ask that is because obviously there was a person in New York City that went on a stabbing spree just last night in New York. Which is that a true statement that knives are something that police officers are generally more scared of, and is there a prevalence of that over guns in your dealings?
Knives are typically personal, up close. Police officers are trained for a 21-foot rule. If you had a knife within 21 feet of me, you could stab me and kill me before I could pull my gun. You'll close that distance before I can get my gun out of my holster.
What is it, 3 seconds? Is that right?
Yeah, 21 feet. So it just happens in a heartbeat. And I was the defensive tactics instructor for years, and I had a painted knife. And I could actually hold up my hand. You couldn't even see it. Walk up to him, and I could paint you with a knife before you could even realize I did it. And that's, just think, somebody comes up across your belly with that knife. There goes your guts. You're holding your guts with your hands now. You're not pulling your gun, so you are completely lost. The battle's over. And knife wounds you can do way more damage. They're exactly right. Slice here, slice there. You're bleeding all over. Or a gun just.
So do you think that changes the conversation at all in, getting guns off of the streets? Obviously, the guns are dangerous, but when you hear talk like that, because there are entire nations, European nations that, they have restrictions on knives as well. Is that something that is missing in the conversation in the United States at all?
I don't think so, because Chicago, the strictest gun laws in the country, and the most gun crimes there are, because honest people follow the law. Laws are made, but criminals don't follow them. So all we do is punish the law abiders by making it stricter and harder to legally own a weapon. They don't buy legal weapons. They buy the illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And until you stop that, it doesn't matter how many laws you have for a gun. There are states that have open carry like us, and the crime rate for violent crime is very nil compared to places that don't. Because you're going to think as a criminal before you go walk into a house that knowing they're going to have a gun.
I would hope that would be the case.
Yeah, there's a great legitimate video of Texas where a guy walked into McDonald's and pulled a gun on the clerk. He was handed her a bag, was telling her to put the money in the bag. And she goes, "Nah, I don't think so." He goes, "I'll shoot you. You might, but they're going to shoot you." And in the back of the video, there's 4 or 5 different patrons all up with guns pointing at him. So
He went to jail, I'm assuming.
oh yeah, he changed his mind about robbing McDonald's with a gun in Texas, where everybody in Texas carries a gun.
Yeah, there's a channel about active self-protection, and there are several videos along those lines where armed citizens come in and, kind of make that backfill between the criminal and the police officer, because they do have that ability. So it's interesting, that you do have the good guy, bad guy with a gun thing that, there is some truth to a good guy with a gun will stop a bad guy with a gun, but you're not going to see that. It's not something that you're going to see on the news, because it doesn't fit the narrative so much.
Along that line, just going back to the respect thing, I've arrested people, and other officers have too. And one particular guy, big guy, took him to jail, no problems, showed him respect. He knew he screwed up, and he just go to jail. And then I was in a fight with a guy and was trying to actually, 2 guys, and I saw this hand come over my shoulder and grab one of them by the throat and pin him up against the wall. He goes, "I got this one, don't worry about it, you get that one." And it was this guy I just arrested the week before.
Oh, wow.
So he says, "I got your backside. You showed me respect, I respect you."
You don't see that all too often, do you?
No, but that happens a lot.
Okay.
I mean, if you're willing to show them respect, they won't hurt you, and they'll help you. It's amazing how many people will help. There's a lot of good people in the country, especially here. There's a lot of good people.
Has that been something that you have seen that's been necessary? A lot of citizens jumping in and helping.
It's happened several times. I know, and they use the term 80-20. You deal with 20% of the population 80% of the time.
Yeah.
But in one thing, when I was always training people, I would tell them every call we go on, no matter how minor and minute to us, is an important phone call to them. Because to call the police is important. And we have to treat that with respect, that this is important to them. Even though we may know there's nothing we can do to help them, you still have to treat them with respect.
Sure. Darren, what is it? If you were to give advice to somebody that was looking to go into law enforcement as a career, what piece of advice would you give them?
First thing I would tell them is go and ride with multiple departments, intern, whatever, to learn and watch and view what it's about. It's not cops and robbers. Most of it, there's a lot of it that's paperwork, report typing, a lot of computer work, and especially nowadays, technology is a big thing. Computer crimes, if you're, Facebook and all that, we have to subpoena Snapchat. They all keep all this stuff that you think you delete. We can subpoena all that and get it all back. But to have that training, that ability, don't scope yourself to one thing. Like Indian Hills, a lot of the kids I would teach for defensive tactics, they all wanted to be a probation and parole officer. That's just not feasible in the real world. Most probation and parole officers were cops. So, because they started out there and moved over. So, you're probably not ever going to start in that field. You need to start somewhere and get your feet wet, learn both sides of the fence.
Okay.
And just be willing to adapt, because you're going to work nights, you're going to work weekends, you can forget holidays. Because when you're the low guy on the totem pole, the old guys take it off.
Senior may, junior must.
Yep. But you'll be amazed how many of the old guys, especially when their kids are grown, if you got kids and it's Christmas, you take it off, I'll work. They won't stick you with the holidays that are important for kids.
Okay.
They'll come in and work them because most of them are very, very slow anyway.
Yeah. What's something that you wish people knew?
I wish everybody could go through the Citizens Academy, because obviously you probably learned a lot of stuff that you had no idea we did.
More than I ever cared to know, honestly.
Yep. And they just had no idea. They just had the perception we eat donuts and drink coffee. I don't do either. Drink a lot of Diet Coke and chocolate bars, but there's just so much more involved than what they see. And it's the perception, just like I talked about the stop sign, cars blow. They see us not do anything, but it's the perception that we don't do anything, even though we are doing something.
Okay.
I'm sure they told you, when you respond to 20,000 calls for service a year, and there's 27 patrol officers, you divide that up, that's pretty hairy days.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And when you take a report and it takes you 2 hours to do the report, and if you do that, take 3 or 4 reports a day, your day's pretty well shot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sometimes it seems like we never leave the PD, because there's days you spend all day there. I think the OWIs are probably the worst. Takes you, minutes, half an hour to stop them, test them, put them in jail. But 3-4 hours to get paperwork
That was one
done.
of the things in the ride-alongs that I have done that I have found absolutely amazing, is the sheer volume of time that an officer will spend doing the back-end stuff. To your point, the arrest took them. I remember one specifically. The person was clearly intoxicated. He was in the vehicle and back at the police station from the point of the stop, and probably 20 minutes from point of stop to the police station. It was just that fast. And I sat there for probably 3.5-4 hours with the officer doing the paperwork. So that is something that is interesting, that you don't know as a regular citizen, that there's that sort of thing that's going into
Right.
it.
And if we don't dot the I across the T correctly, they get dismissed on technicality,
Yeah.
even though they're clearly intoxicated.
Right. Well, Darren, thanks for coming in.
You betcha.